few gatherings. What happened? I can't quite figure it out, but there's really something that fell apart here. Paul's scratching his head, and you can't quite get it all together, but it seems like that one church that was united in Christ Jesus, and everybody got baptized, as baptisms often do, and people stand together and cheer and yell and carry on, and we look at little babies, and it's so awesome that we're united in one spirit, and the moment died. The moment died. Maybe the parents took the children out, and they went on, and they didn't show up to church one day, and people began to forget what it was like that united people together. The babies were no longer being baptized, and people began to kind of fall into their own little worlds and their own little devices, and that kind of started eking into the church. Weird things began to happen. People like Mark wouldn't sit next to people like Deb anymore. They couldn't talk anymore because they realized the things that brought them together were keeping them different. Look, Mark's way in the back of the church. He wouldn't even come with that. He used to sit down. I'm kidding, of course. I don't even know. Okay, yeah. So there are things that were going on there. People were trying to figure out. Well, it's like some people kind of saying, well, where do you go to church? Well, I go to the Middletown Reformed Church. Well, you do? Because the way I hear you describe it doesn't sound like my friend goes there too. It sounds like you guys go to a totally different church. And it confuses Paul because he couldn't figure out what was going on there. And the more he realized that these letters and cards were coming in, he was reading like the return addresses going, they're all coming from the same place, but it doesn't sound like they're talking about the same place. Wait a minute. It's like, what happened here? What happened to the things that have united us and caused us to be a people? And Paul's scratching his head, and you sometimes wonder, could he ever really be far from the truth of what happens in our lives as life goes on? Years before that, Jesus was walking along in a town pretty similar like Middletown. There's no lake here, is there? So that's where that metaphor falls apart. And it's amazing what happens when Jesus walks through town. He comes in and he's walking around and he didn't stop and talk to anybody. Out of his news, I think sometimes Jesus gets a little bit confused about how people operate. He didn't ask. He forgot to stop in and knock on doors and say, hey, how are you doing today? Hey, listen, tell me about Peter. What do you know about him? What do you think about him? Good guy? Bad guy? What do you think? Is he worthy to walk with me? What do you think? He didn't go across the street and ask about Peter's brother Andrew. He goes, all right, listen, here's what I hear, right? I hear Peter's good. What about his brother Andrew? What do you know about him? You get along? Peter and Andrew get along? How's that going? He didn't ask these questions at all. I mean, he goes on. He's got the Zebedee twins there, and then the father sitting in the boat. He doesn't even go off to the father and say, tell me about your kids. Tell me about how wonderful they are. Tell me about the shining light in your eyes. Tell me about that they're the backbone of your business. Tell me how wonderful your children are. Tell me what it's like when they're home and they never fight. Tell me what it's like in their waking hours when they always get along. Tell me about the complete lack of sibling rivalry that exists in your home. Jesus doesn't ask all of these questions with people when he comes into the world. He didn't ask anybody their political persuasions. He didn't ask anybody their persuasions about life and liberty and the pursuit of love and justice and happiness. He didn't ask anybody what they think about any of the political stuff or the popular social stuff. He doesn't do any of that. Jesus walks into the world and starts picking people. You, and you. Yeah, come on. Come on, follow me. Come on, we got great things to do together. We got great things to do together. And I wish I was a person on the sideline, especially when he was calling the disciples. Especially if I wish I was a person who lived in the town and lived there all of the years. Because this is the craziness that prophets do when they walk into town. They start calling people together. Come on out. And the people turn around and say, Jesus, is he out of his mind? He's got it. And I'm going to get hard on this because I think it's funny. He's got market going to a political rally together. What is he thinking? What's going to happen with that? He mixed things up, and he's got Donna's kids going home with the dwarfs. How's that going to work out? It's going to be totally crazy. The house is going to turn upside down. They're not ready for that. How did that happen? He's got kids going home with Dolores Hoffman. You can't get dumb kids home with Dolores Hoffman. It's not going to work out that way. Jesus is out of his mind. What's he thinking bringing people together? What is Jesus thinking when he brings people together? What is this vision that God has when God looks down upon us and turns around and says, look at my people, how wonderfully created they are. I'm going to bring them all together in this space. And Paul asks the question, is Cardiff big enough to hold all you people together in one space? What's it going to take for everybody to get together in one space and come together and get over our stuff that keeps us apart from each other? There's going to be fights. There's going to be sibling rivalry. There's going to be all of those things that get us absolutely crazy with one another, that drive us nuts. But God did not create the world for each of us to go to our own little islands and our own little places of isolation. That's not what we're here for. Because I think each time we try to do that, God's going to play the biggest joke on each and every one of us and start calling us together. Well, then what? Then where are we going to be? I think the hardest thing that we got to do as a people of God is to get over our stuff. It's hard to get over our stuff because my stuff is more important than your stuff. I got the right stuff, you got the wrong stuff, and the better way you see my point of view, the world will be a lot easier once you can see that I'm right most of the time. And you, well, you got some catching up to do. We got to get over that. We got to get over this world of right versus wrong, me versus you, who's in charge, I'm in charge. This is too much that comes into it that we get to a point where even in families, we can't even agree how to come together anymore. I was at a funeral last week. We buried Mrs. Sharkey. Some people, Mrs. Sharkey has some good times on this world, so I forgot anyway. You know, she was one of those people. You love her, and then you love to be away from her. That seems like one of those kind of people. So we buried Mrs. Sharkey. It's amazing. I stood in the same Christmas for the church, my home parish growing up. And I stood, and you watched. And there was like family members over here, and there's a few people way back there. And you could see the church, as big as it was, people were spread all over the place. And they selected this fool over there to stand up and talk about Mrs. Sharkey. And the funniest point about it was that if you knew her, she knew how to unite people. Even people that drove, people just went crazy. Chicken cutlets. This woman can unite people over chicken cutlets. It's amazing. It's amazing. And in her name, the repast after the funeral was held at an Italian restaurant that learned her recipe, and the meal was chicken cutlets. It united people together, and begrudgingly, it was funny to watch people sit with one another and laugh and tell the stories that brought them together. As I wrote this week, my nephew and I were preparing notes. Paulie, what is it that you talk about when you go to church? And I talk to him. And he's on his iPod, half paying attention as kids often kids do. And he's flipping through my iPod, and he's going back and forth. And he comes across one song. He goes, you know this song? And I said, yeah. He goes, that's really cool that you know this song. How do you know this song? And I said, well, I think that song was pretty popular when I was a kid. And he said, well, you know, we sing it in church. And I said, you do? And he said, yeah. And I said, do you know the words? And this is what we started singing together. And you might know. The words go like this. Sometimes I'm right, but I can be wrong. My own beliefs are in my song. The butcher, the baker, the drummer, and then Makes no difference what group I'm in. And everyday people, yeah. And in the corner, there is a blue one who can't accept the green one for living with the fat one, trying to be a skinny one. Different strokes for different folks, and so on and so on, Scooby-Dooby-Doo. So you get how it goes. I'm sitting there with a 12-year-old, generations apart, and we're singing the song together and laughing about it. I had nothing else to say. It was like Michael taking the words right out of my children's mouth. Our kids get it. Maybe sometimes we gotta go back to being kids and learning and singing. And just figuring out how to get along together. It's what I call this thing called bonfire theology. I think in the midst of all our stuff, the world gets a little better where we can get a whole bunch of people. Take a whole bunch of the garbage in our lives, put it in one big heap, light it on fire, pull out a guitar and get some s'mores. Because, man, there's nothing better that unites the world than some good old-fashioned music from the 60s and the 70s, Hershey's chocolate, graham crackers, marshmallows. It brings the world together. And just one final thought on this. So I know we got a lot of singing to do, and Miss Judy has to give you lots of instructions for how the rest of the worship's going to go. And we have no time now. But I just want to say this. Sometimes the hardest thing about coming together as a people of God is getting over our stuff. And the hardest chapter becomes forgiveness. You know, folks, I think sometimes the biggest thing that we got to forgive one another is that we are not God. And I think once we can get over that none of us are God, it makes life with God a heck of a lot easier. And life with one another a little bit more enjoyable.